Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Matt Jarbo. Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. And this week we're going to be diving into, I would argue, probably my most anticipated film of 2022, and that is Matt Reeves' The Batman. This movie has had a 5-year development cycle, gone through a pandemic, been delayed a couple times, and dealt with the fervor and ire of a scorned fan base from the previous person who was playing the Caped Crusader. And all of that has to do with just the way things worked out. Now, if you're unfamiliar with some of the background of this movie, let me just kind of touch upon some of the things that led us to this weekend and its release of The Batman. This is a reboot. This is a whole new disconnected universe from everything involving the DCEU. And while I'm not personally a big fan of that, I kind of feel like they just really kind of screwed the pooch on this one, considering that Marvel consistently kind of knocks it out of the park with their connected universe. DC is going a different direction, but after seeing this movie and loving the hell out of this movie, I would argue that we're perfectly okay. So I've changed my opinion, if you will, but never mind the fact that there's actually a lot Warner Brothers is doing to expand this particular universe even right now. And we'll talk about that towards the end of this thing. But to really dive in to everything, to give you a quick brief history lesson of what happened, you have to go back to 2016, specifically March 25th, 2016, when Batman v Superman opened in theaters to a great opening weekend, but terrible critical score, terrible word of mouth, and it rocked Warner Brothers to their core. They were afraid of what was going to happen with that movie. They were afraid of what was going to happen with the currently in pre-production Justice League. So they altered course. They changed everything. And if you followed any of that story, you know exactly what happened. And we got the Snyder Cut finally. We got to see Ben Affleck again as Batman. And that had a lot of people really, really hyped up. But what happened, though, was in 2017, Ben Affleck stepped down as the writer and director of The Batman. And then that went over to Matt Reeves. Matt Reeves was actually pitching ideas to Warner Brothers, but he didn't want to tell them everything until after he finished up the 2017 summer release of War for the Planet of the Apes. And that, I think, solidified what he was able to do with a very over-the-top concept and ground it very well. That made him the right person for this job. But as time progressed and Ben Affleck's relationship with his wife deteriorated, as his alcoholism progressed, as he was trying to get better and trying to deal with the whole thing, frustrations with the studio and frustrations with life and everything else, it prompted him to walk away from the role. And at that point, the Batman became Matt Reeves, the Batman. No longer Ben Affleck's movie, Matt Reeves' movie. And I've seen a lot of people out there furious this weekend at the fact that it's named The Batman, but the history shows us Affleck walked away. Now, in recent times, he has decided to come back for the Snyder Cut for a little bit extra there, as well as a cameo in the upcoming Flash movie that will ultimately end out his tenure as Batman, paving the way for Michael Keaton, of all things, to return. But again, that is a whole other conversation. But from there, Warner Brothers was not planning on going back to the Snyder well, and they wanted to go a different direction. So they basically kind of treated Matt Reeves like they treated James Gunn with the Suicide Squad, predominantly hands off, letting these creatives create. And to be fair, both have done very well outside of the normal DCEU structure, which might be why we are where we are. Most likely, I would argue the biggest form of controversy coming off of this movie had everything to do with the casting. When it was announced in, I believe, 2019, that Robert Pattinson, by the way, it's Pattinson, not Patterson, as people keep saying that. He's not like a freaking maid in a house somewhere. It's Pattinson. When he was announced as being cast as Batman, that caused a lot of people to dust off their old Twilight insults and start talking about Batman Who Sparkle. And you know what? I think they kind of made fun of that a little bit in the Lego Movie Part 2, but that's a whole other argument. However, Pattinson has been making a name for himself in a number of different smaller independent art house movies, really kind of playing up the character range and getting away from the moniker of being the sparkly vampire Edward Cullen. And despite a change.org petition from people really wanting to see him get removed from the role, they sallied forth, and in 2020, they started filming this movie. Again, they got a couple weeks into production before the pandemic shut it all down. And as a result of that, and even Robert Pattinson himself getting COVID, they were able to make this 3-hour noir movie actually freaking work in ways that I did not expect, in ways that I was impressed by, and quite frankly have stayed with me for the past couple days since I saw this movie at the special IMAX fan screening that they had a couple nights ago. This movie, for lack of a better term, is a masterpiece in a number of ways. And it really does go to tell you how Matt Reeves was able to ground this hero in a world full of bad and corrupt people, and Batman trying to walk that line while striking fear into the hearts of his enemies in order to clean up the city and not fall victim to the same corruption. It's a very interesting take on the character, this time modeled, inspired by The Long Halloween, inspired by Batman Year One, inspired by a litany of different types of Batman stories. Matt Reeves really kind of dove into the Bat catalog and found the themes and the tones he wanted to pull from without really adapting a specific story completely. This movie starts on October 31st and it goes through November 6th. It's a week in the life of Gotham, aka The Long Halloween, in all but real name. Like I said, when Reeves took on this particular story for himself, he wanted to set it early on in Batman's vigilante career, and he started working on a new script from scratch. Affleck's movie was kind of more of a James Bondian approach, or some people have referred to it as kind of like a John Wick style approach to Batman, where all things considered, I believe the plot synopsis for Ben Affleck's movie was it takes place in Arkham Asylum, where Deathstroke helps orchestrate a breakout of all of the career criminals that Batman had helped put away. And Batman has to go into Arkham Asylum in order to capture everybody again, and then to be tired so Deathstroke could finally eliminate him. It sounds pretty cool. Would have loved to have seen it. Maybe one day we'll get that adapted into some kind of animated project or maybe a graphic novel. Same with, Justice League 2, Justice League 3. I don't believe we're ever going to see those in live action, but maybe an animated movie would be great. Who knows? Maybe we'll get down that road. But anyway, Matt Reeves really wanted to just kind of dive in to the story, and he wanted it to be about a serial killer and the people that are pillars in the city and the criminal element and the corruption that surrounds all of this. He did want to base it off of, or I should say base the Riddler off of the Zodiac Killer, because around the same time he was reading Mindhunter and was reading a lot about the killer who was very active in Cali back in the 1960s. We all know that Zodiac, the movie that's just now 15 years old, this week, by the way, and Seven, both David Fincher films, were very instrumental in being an influence to the tone and the stylings of this movie. This movie is bathed in Fincher for inspiration, but it does not feel entirely like a Fincher movie. I don't think Fincher would have been able to pull off what Matt Reeves is able to pull off. A Fincher style Batman movie would have been very interesting. It would have been a very interesting directorial effort, but I think it would have again been way out in one field. I don't know if it would have been as commercially viable as this one is, even though this one clocks in at 3 hours and is dark and is violent and may not be for kids. In fact, that might be a bit of a problem for the overall box office as we kind of see this thing play out. But 45 days from its release, 45 days from today, this movie will be on HBO Max. So, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with that thing. But anyway, with the Zodiac being the inspiration for Riddler, as well as it tying into the corruption and crime, he had the setting for the start of the story. And he really wanted to capture Bruce Wayne at a different point in his life where he is very much a raw instrument. Again, if we're going to kind of tie it back into another maybe an origin movie of sorts. I would say 2006's Casino Royale, where not Batman, where James Bond is described by M as being a blunt instrument, which he is. He's not a refined gentleman spy. He has to kind of grow into that. Batman here is very much the same way. And it works because there's always been a darkness in Batman, and it's one that never truly gets explored. It's always either like there on the surface, but he gives into the darkness in the case of, let's say, Keaton, who openly murders people and is gleeful about it, even in Batman Returns. Or, Ben Affleck with Batfleck's, action scenes where he has killed people, and it's kind of like, yeah, what do you expect? Here, Batman is like, no, I'm not killing anyone, and I'm not using guns. And while he doesn't explicitly come out and say it, there are scenes where he heavily implies it through a couple lines of dialogue that, again, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. It doesn't need to be handed to you on a silver platter, but it is definitely used in a way that you're like, I get what he's going for. I understand what he's trying to do. Really, what Matt Reeves wanted to focus on with the development of this character is to spend time with the world's greatest detective. We don't get to see a lot of that in these movies because I think a lot of people just want the action. They know Batman as the Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight. That is who they know him as. They know he's also the world's greatest detective, but that feels like it oftentimes takes a back seat in order to get to more action. Here, there's a lot of detective work, and it's really good detective work, and he works well with Jim Gordon, and they have this kind of, pardon the terminology, but a bit of a dynamic duo, between the two of them. And it works really, really, really well to solidify that camaraderie and to solidify that relationship. Not only that, but like Jeffrey Wright knocks it out of the park as Commissioner Gordon. I was a little concerned at first because, I love Jeffrey Wright, but I was a little concerned at first. I'm like, all right, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Nailed it. He's a better actor in this movie than Pattinson is, and I think Pattinson nailed it too. Although I will say, because I haven't mentioned her yet, Zoë Kravitz as Catwoman. Oh, yeah. She shines, very much shines. There's a good relationship between the two of them. There's a lot of chemistry between the two of them. And you get to actually see how that plays out in regards to how Batman feels. One of the things I haven't said yet, and I said this kind of in my instant reaction when I saw the movie, was this is oddly one of the most motivational and inspirational movies we could get right now. And you may be thinking to yourself, Matt, what the hell are you smoking? How much crack are you on? Not on any crack. Not that I know of. But really, we'll talk about that when we start breaking down the plot, but it is mentioned in the beginning and in the end about how he needs to be different. And it plays out very well in regards to character growth and character development, of which there is a lot in this movie. I've seen a lot of criticisms, a lot of critiques talking about it and saying things like that are very surface level. And I feel like not scratching or just scratching the surface of this is not enough. You really have to treat it like an onion and peel back the layers. If we're going to go back and pull out that old Shrek thing, I feel you really have to do that. And this movie is like locked and loaded with layers. The director of photography, Greg Fraser, was the guy who worked with Reeves on Let Me In back in 2010. He also helped innovate the stagecraft technology that is used for The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, and what is going to be used in Thor, Love and Thunder, and practically all upcoming Marvel movies, as well as any Star Wars movies. And a lot of other studios are implementing stagecraft tech. Even Netflix is now getting into stagecraft tech. But this is the first feature film to use this technology. And when I saw the movie in IMAX, I was specifically looking for the scenes where I knew that it was used. And in IMAX, it didn't blow me away, but it was still a nice touch. And you could tell that it felt better. It felt more lived in. You could tell that the LED screens were far greater than green screen because it gave a sense of realism, not just for the actors to respond to, but quite frankly, for the natural lighting that they were trying to get in these scenes. It looks wonderful. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll probably think that it could be real. And that to me shows you how wonderful this technology is and how awesome its utilization will be in the future. that was one of the things I did love about this movie, is that Gotham felt lived in. It felt grimy. It felt dark. It felt like it was coming apart at the seams. It felt like it was corrupt from the top down. It felt like all of these things. And that to me shows you that they knew how to nail the aesthetic of the world. If you look at Joker from 2019, taking place in the early 1980s during a trash crisis, they really did make Brooklyn look like a disgusting, grimy, corrupt, polluted Gotham. And it sold the story well. And that's exactly what this movie did too. And I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are going to be talking about. And it works really for the story because Gotham itself is a character. Gotham itself is very much a character in this movie. And if it wasn't portrayed as it was, I don't believe the story would have had the impact that it did. So why don't we dive into the story? As always, you know, there's spoilers going forward from here. There's spoilers throughout all of this. I think you guys kind of know that at this point. I just want to dive in. As I said before, the movie opens on Halloween, and it opens through a first-person perspective as the dusk sets upon the city. And we see a person looking through goggles or binoculars at a house. It's a rich person's house. We don't know who this family is. We don't know who they are. All we can hear is deep, labored breathing. Somebody is watching intently. And it really does feel, to an extent, without being as horrifying, I should say, it does feel like the opening to 1978's Halloween, where the opening of that movie with Michael Myers stalking through the house in order to go and kill his sister, that was terrifying, and it still is terrifying nearly 50 years later. But this is one of those instances where it just sets the tone. This family is being watched. The young boy is dressed as a ninja. He's going out trick-or-treating for Halloween. And then, of course, the family leaves and the husband is left behind. And we find out that this is Gotham City Mayor Don Mitchell Jr., who is currently running for re-election against a new progressive young black woman, which, by the way, some people out there have had a lot of problems with this, and it's, you know, to mask off, if you will. But as he's watching this, you know, debate coverage on the media, and he's getting worried about losing in the polls, a serial killer comes in behind him, the Riddler, and brutally murders him, sets the stage for the game to be played. What I loved about this opening scene was the way that it was shot, the intensity of the shadows and how it was very noir. Don Mitchell was absolutely unaware that the Riddler was there. He was absolutely unaware that anyone was behind him until it was too late. But even the Riddler was not sophisticated in his actions. He wasn't a methodical killer. He did succeed in his goal, but he lunged at the mayor and he tried tackling him, and then he tried taking him out. And there wasn't much of a struggle because he caught the guy by surprise, but you could tell even he wasn't as prepared for what he was doing in that moment, which does come into play later on. After that, we get to the intro where we get to see the city, the grime, the corruption, everything else. And we get Batman's narration, learning that he had been the vigilante now for 2 years, that he goes by the name Vengeance, that the bat signal in the sky is used as a way to promote fear in the hearts of all criminals out there who might be up to no good, because Batman cannot be everywhere. But there's a musing thought that I really liked with this. And he's talking about how even though he's been doing it for 2 years, nothing has gotten better. And he doesn't know why it's not working. And I think that's something that a lot of people bring up every once in a while when they discuss Batman. Why is it that this guy, like, he's been fighting crime for all of these years, and it doesn't seem to be making a difference? The villains keep coming. They keep getting weirder and crazier and more violent and more extravagant and more flamboyant. And even though Batman keeps having to up his game in order to defeat them, Gotham doesn't seem safer. It's an interesting thought. And it's one that's kind of echoed in the opening of this movie. What I love, though, is the first action scene. We see it in the trailer where he fights the group of guys with the white faces. And that's a great scene, too, because we realize that, you know, he is a fighter, but he is still not like as good as he could be. He does get his ass beat a little bit here, but ultimately prevails, generally because one guy who didn't want to, use a gun or didn't want to fight kind of saved Batman's life by intervening very quickly, causing the guy to misfire, the bullet ricocheting off Batman's helmet and hitting somebody else, giving Batman a moment to kind of recollect his thoughts and kind of shake off, I guess you could say, like the Kevlar hit, whatever, and then continue to beat everyone's ass. And I thought that was great. I thought that was great because it shows you that he's still raw and he's untrained and he's by himself and he has the upper hand. He has the darkness. He has the fear, but still not enough. And he barely gets by. And I really enjoy that because it shows that he's not overpowered yet. In many instances, Batman always comes across as being massively overpowered. And we have to remember that he's still a mortal man made of flesh and blood. So I thought that was awesome. Now from there, he goes and he works with Gordon, who is trusting of him. Not so much really trusting of everybody else, but he definitely trusts Batman. And he brings him in to the crime scene. And they know that Batman shouldn't be there, right? They know that Batman should not be in here because he is not a cop. He's a vigilante. They know that he's a vigilante. But Gordon vouches for him. And since everyone there respects Gordon, who is just a lieutenant at this point in time, he definitely holds on to that power. He holds on to that respect because it's earned. And he in turn is giving it to the Batman. And so there is a little bit of the animosity with the other officers. But at the end, they kind of understand if Gordon says it's okay, if Gordon says it's cool, then it's cool. And from here, we get the first clue, the first riddle. And, realizing here that there's a bit of juxtaposition with Batman. There's a bit of a personal connection to this case. Because while Don Mitchell Jr. was killed by the Riddler, he was found by his 10-year-old son. And there's a point where Batman looks over at the kid and the kid is being interviewed by police and he's clearly shocked and he's upset and he's scared. And he looks back at Batman and we can tell without saying anything, we can tell that there's very much that connection there. Batman understands what this kid is going through. And there's nothing he can do to make it better, but he understands. And I think at that point, he kind of realizes that he has got to be very much aware of what is going on and solve this before anything else happens. What I like, though, is this is when it goes into Zodiac territory. The old cipher and the clues and the riddles, and it just seems to make sense on more of a realistic scale. If you're going to set this particular trap in motion, you're going to have to make it interesting for the audience, interesting for the characters, and also have a bit of panache, a bit of flair. And I'll tell you this is what I loved about it. Because there was a reference in this point. They find out that Don Mitchell, he lost his thumb. And when they were able to decode the cipher, it says drive. And so Gordon and Batman head down to the garage. They find a car. And Batman's like, look for a USB. USB drive. Why? Because they're looking for that. And then like, okay, well then how do we open it? Or how do we encrypt it or unencrypt it? And Batman's like, holds up the thumb, the severed thumb, which was in the keys in the car. Thumb drive. What I loved about this was if you've ever watched the old 1960s Batman show, which you should, every time the Riddler left a clue for Batman, Adam West would always turn it into a pun. It was always a pun. And if you're not thinking about it from that perspective, you might chuckle at the thumb drive. My audience chuckled at it. But the deeper meaning tying back to the old 1960s show was brilliant. Because it was a nice little Easter-ish sort of egg. I'm not going to sit there and say, hands down, that's what it was. But through my viewpoint, my lens, my perspective, that's exactly what it was. So I really enjoyed that. From here, they discover that everything ties back to the Iceberg Lounge, which is owned and operated by the Penguin, Oswald Cobblepot. And this is also where we meet Selina Kyle. Now, Selena works at the bar, at the club, and she's friends with Annika, who is a girl that was in a picture with the mayor. And that's what gets sent out to everybody. What I liked about what happened next is that we kind of start to uncover this story as if it was told from an old detective noir film, right? You know, the mayor is caught with a young woman leaving a seedy establishment run by a mobster. That ends up going out to the media. Batman starts looking into it, trying to identify the woman, realizes that she works at the club, goes there to confront Cobblepot, and ends up meeting Catwoman in the process. And from there, he realizes that there's something different about this one specifically. She clearly knows more than she's letting on. So he follows her back to her place where she's with the woman, and she then dresses as the cat to go and break into the mayor's office in order to get the young woman's passport back so the two of them can flee the city. And this is where Batman and Catwoman meet for the first time. And again, I thought it was a great encounter. Because while they do briefly scuttle, they briefly fight, as soon as they get the attention of the card that's like outside the door, Batman stops, grabs her, holds her close, and like they're just silent together while the cop comes in, looks around, and then leaves. There was an intimacy there, a very interesting intimacy, one where it felt like these two people just knew each other, like right off the bat. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like there was this weird kind of meet cute scenario. You know, awkward laugh, ha ha ha, nice to meet you. They felt like they were simpatico from the beginning. And I thought that it was a nice start to this relationship between the two of them, especially because they had differing reasons for doing what they're doing. She wanted to rescue her friend. He wanted to find out why the mayor was involved and what's going on with this club. But when they realize Annika is gone and the place is tossed, they have almost no choice but to work together. And here's the thing is, again, you can tell the mentality of the people involved in this part of the film. Selena wants answers. She just wants Annika. The Batman doesn't really care for her as much. At this point, he is just using her as a means to an end. He is using her as bait. He enables her with an earpiece microphone as well as a contact lens that allows her to live stream and record, I'm assuming in 4K, everything. And it's tied back into his system setup, and he's able to ID people that she's looking at. So she goes down into Club 44, which is the club beneath the club, the real club, if you will, and ends up meeting Gil Colson. He is the district attorney for the Southern District of Gotham City. Very much a play on the Southern District of New York, if you know anything about how that whole thing plays out, which I thought was pretty great. And this guy is worried. This guy is freaked out already with the death of the mayor, and now also the death of the former GCPD commissioner, Pete Savage. We can see here that this guy's worried that something is going to happen. And he is doing the drugs, the drops is what they call it, but he's paranoid, and he's talking with, Catwoman, and she ends up, seeing Carmine Falcone, and she gets freaked out and she leaves after Batman basically pressures her to tell the relationship status, right? He assumes the absolute worst. And that again is very indicative of where Batman is at the time. He assumes the absolute worst about everybody, even her in that moment. But that causes her to get pissed off. She takes off. And then Coulson ends up getting kidnapped and beaten in the car by the Riddler. From here, we get that epic funeral scene where the Riddler sends Coulson in with a bomb around his neck, which is very reminiscent in my mind of that real incident in Erie, Pennsylvania, where the pizza delivery driver had a bomb around his neck and was forced to go and rob banks lest it be blown up. But then we found out after he died that he was in on the plot, just not all of the plot. This is not that case specifically. Coulson is trying to protect himself. He refuses to give up who is being protected by the powers that be, the pillars of the community inside of Gotham. And this costs him his life. In the process of this, Batman gets knocked back from the blast, ends up having a bit of a concussion, blacks out, wakes up in GCPD. And what's amazing is nobody pulled his cowl off. Nobody stopped for a second. They wanted to, but this is what I'm talking about beforehand with that respect towards Gordon. Nobody wanted to go against Gordon. Gordon had his back, but it was only going to last so long because Batman now had a target on his back. He was getting too close. You could clearly tell that something was going on. Gordon started to believe it. Batman started to believe it. And Gordon helps Batman escape by taking a shot to the chin. And from there, Batman does that great shot from the trailer where he launches up through the stairwell with all the cops shooting at him. And then he goes and he puts on the flight suit using his cape, which was great. And then just like free falls right off of the top of the GCPD building and giving us an awesome view of him gliding through Gotham. It was great. Really, really like that scene. From here, Gordon and Batman are able to figure out that the Penguin is somehow involved in all of this. So they start to follow him to a drug deal. And this is where Catwoman shows up in order to steal the money that has been brought there. But in the process of this, she finds Annika's corpse in the trunk of another cop's car, causing her to freak out and get everyone's attention. From here, and this is, I think, probably like the best part of the movie, like Penguin pulls out an Uzi and just lights Batman up, but the Kevlar knocks him down. Batman is able to get away. And as Penguin is trying to make his way towards Catwoman to see what's going on, from out of the darkness comes the thruster from the Batmobile. And you just see it light up and rev. And in IMAX with that sound system, it was amazing. And you can just see the fear in their eyes about, oh shit, it is on. This is real. And from there, we get one of the most thrilling car chase scenes ever. This happens in like almost pure rain. It's like a hurricane. It feels like it's just this massive rainstorm, and the Penguin is driving, knocking cars out of his way and trying to get around everybody to get away from Batman. And Batman is just keeping up on him. And we see that spectacular shot from the trailer where there's that explosion. He thinks Batman is dead, but here he comes through the flames, knocks the Penguin on his ass. And then we find out that he's not actually the informant, and this is a great interaction too, by the way, because showing you the camaraderie between Gordon and Batman in this scene when they're interrogating the Penguin is funny because it shows you that they work really well together. Even at one point, the Penguin goes, "Oh, what are you, good cop?" and he's bad cop. And then they realize that they made a mistake in regards to understanding Spanish. And that part cracked me the hell up because the Penguin's like, "What, don't you guys know Spanish?" And it was like just this little moment of levity where the bad guy had a bit of one up on the good guys, but that allowed them to really unlock the next clue. And from there, they take off. And I thought that was great because they leave the Penguin tied up and he starts to waddle away. So again, just a total like nod to the whole concept of the Penguin. And they play it up beautifully for one shot. And it doesn't dwell on it. It doesn't dwell on it in any particular fashion to like lessen the levity and also to lessen the impact of the scene. The movie is very well paced at this point in time. Again, it's a 3-hour-long movie. There's still a long way to go, but I think you're into it in these scenes. They flow so well, they work so well that I just really enjoyed this one. And from here, they realize that the next clue is actually at the old orphanage. And it's now just a dilapidated building. It's full of drop heads. It's basically just Junkie Central. But as Gordon and Batman make their way in, they find a projector. And on this projector, we learn a very dark history about Thomas and Martha Wayne. That Martha's family was the Arkhams. I didn't know that. That caught me really by surprise. And that there was a dark history there where there was a journalist who was trying to look into Martha's past because her mother had committed suicide after killing her father. And that Martha herself was in and out of mental institutions, Arkham Asylum, and that this information was going to come to light right before Thomas Wayne was going to, to vote for him to become mayor. And then that journalist ended up dying, ended up being killed. And so the way that this whole thing was framed was that Thomas Wayne had this man killed. And that destroys Batman's entire identity, entire vision and view of his father, who he had put on this pedestal. But this is where we start to see the sins of the father come to play. This is when we start to realize that the next victim is in fact Bruce Wayne. And there's this great, intense moment where he is racing back to the apartment. Alfred is there and is, ignoring the phone call, but looking through the mail and comes across one directed to Bruce Wayne. He opens it, and inside there is a package that has flammable written on it, and he throws it, but it's too late. It causes an explosion. And as Bruce is able to get through to the maid, we find out that everything else happened an hour earlier and that it's already too late. So, I mean, I was already under the assumption that Alfred was dead. I'm like, oh my God, you brought in Andy Serkis as Alfred just to like kill him off 2/3 of the way through the movie. I mean, okay, I don't really agree with that, but if this is a story you want to tell, no. Again, they kind of subverted expectations where he was injured, but he was still alive. And Bruce starts to kind of realize that maybe, just maybe, he actually cares about people. That's kind of the whole point, is otherwise he thinks the worst of everybody because he does that as a way to protect himself. He doesn't ever want to feel that fear again of being helpless. And as a result of that, he's boxed everybody out. But when his father figure is critically injured and near death, that kind of shakes it loose a little bit. Not all the way, but enough to cause a little bit of sunlight to get through into that dark cave of the soul. And it was a great scene, and Andy Serkis really knocked it out of the park, in my opinion. I thought he did a great job with that. But it was during this moment of realization for Bruce that he had another epiphany, and that comes from the fact that Alfred confirms that this journalist was killed, that he believed that it was Falcone who did it, while Falcone was trying to get some dirt on an otherwise morally upstanding individual named Thomas Wayne. This is one of those things that just kind of rocks Bruce to his core. This isn't Batman. This is Bruce. This is a young boy with PTSD who never got over a traumatic event, learning that his father was not the person he believed him to be, not the angel or like the moral compass entirely. From there, Bruce, not Batman, decides to go talk to Falcone himself to get information, and Falcone spins it to where he did a favor for Thomas. Thomas wanted Falcone to put the fear of God into this journalist, but Falcone knew that that wasn't going to be enough, so they killed him. And that this journalist was on the payroll for Sal Maroni, the former drug kingpin of Gotham, and that Sal Maroni got revenge on the Waynes by having them killed. It's an interesting juxtaposition between two possible narratives. And at this point, you really don't know what to believe in the movie. We are about as confused as Bruce is, because even as we as Batman fans have always thought about Thomas and Martha Wayne being upstanding pillars of the community. And here we find out that there's a dark secret. Everyone has skeletons, so to speak. So it's really interesting. Like, I didn't quite know where things were going to go. But after this, we discover that Falcone had Annika killed and that Selina was going to kill him. What I loved about this next part was that it really wasn't Batman breaking into the Iceberg Lounge. It was really Bruce doing it. And then once he infiltrated it, he was then able to act as Batman in order to get down to save Selina, who at this point made her move, but was kind of outmatched by Falcone. It was definitely one of those things where she was emotional and she didn't really see it coming, but he was in the process of getting ready to kill her after he confessed to killing her mother and killing Annika and everything else, where finally Batman comes in and saves her in the moment. And that was a good moment because he was able to stop her from becoming corrupt, stop her from crossing the line. He was trying to protect her because he clearly cares about her. Again, this movie has a lot to do with like emotion and how we feel about other people and how they impact our lives and how it's okay to be emotional and have those connections with people. But what was great was now that they had Falcone, they could drag him out from the bottom of the Iceberg Lounge where he basically hid away. He never went outside. He was very reclusive. And the whole thing the Riddler wanted was for the rat to be drug out into the light. And when that happens, Falcone is shot dead because the Riddler was across the street with a sniper rifle and had set the whole thing up because he was unmasked moments later as a forensic accountant who had actually figured out that the Gotham renewal program set forth by Thomas Wayne mere weeks before his death, that was meant to keep a replenishing fund coming in to the city to help with the lower class, to help with the people, was being used and abused by the Gotham elite. And he figured that out, and he knew that it all went back to Falcone, and he needed the Batman's help to lure Falcone out and drag the rat into the light. And what was great about this was probably the most intense scene in the movie, when Batman confronts the Riddler at Arkham Hospital. And he starts off by saying, Bruce Wayne, Bruce Wayne. And you're like, ah, crap, man. Like, he knows. The Riddler knows that Batman is Bruce Wayne. Like, of course he does, man. Like, of course he does. And then you realize, no, he doesn't. And in that moment, like, you could see that Batman puts out a sigh of relief. I think the audience put out a sigh of relief. It was one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, he doesn't. So now Batman can be Batman again. And we find out that the Riddler, he wanted Batman to join him. He thought that they were kindred spirits in taking out the elite in order to cripple the system, to kind of start Gotham anew. He had set other things in motion. Not only did he have vans packed with explosives at the sea break around town in order to detonate them at the same time to flood Gotham, he did it where he also had an army of at least, I think, of at least 20 or 30 guys, all dressed like the Riddler, who believed in his mission to take down the corrupt elite and to reset the system by basically creating a shooting gallery where these guys would all be dressed as the Riddler in Gotham Square Garden. And during the flooding, when everyone is corralled around, they would just start opening fire and it would just be a slaughter. And as the levees broke and as the Gotham was flooding and everyone was trying to get to the center, Batman makes his way there in order to fight all of them and to almost get killed. He gets a shotgun blast right to the center of the chest, which, even though he's rocking Kevlar, man, that's going to knock the wind out of him. And Selina comes to his aid because she cares for him. And then she gets knocked down and she almost gets killed. And that is again where he sees something that angers him. You could tell he is angry, but he is unable to do anything until he has an adrenaline shot that he hits himself with. And that just sparks all of that rage, all of that, I am vengeance. And he beats this dude nearly to death until he's stopped by Gordon. And when they unmask the Riddler wannabe, it's the guy from the funeral earlier on that had talked to Bruce, calling out the Waynes, specifically calling out the elite. And that man says, I am vengeance. And in that moment, Bruce realizes that, ooh, this is not a good idea. Like, my messaging has kind of gotten off point. My messaging hasn't really worked out very well. Maybe I should not do that. And that is where it becomes, again, like very kind of motivational and inspirational. Like, Batman realizes that he cannot be just vengeance. He has to be more. He has to be the hero. He has to help people. He has to inspire people. And he does. And he's out kind of in the daytime, like in the early morning and whatever, and he's not hiding in the shadows. He's not using the darkness to his advantage. He's out there and people can look to him as being a ray of hope. And even in the moments leading up to that, like, he had saved the young boy who was the son of the former mayor, who was there at the event where the new mayor was going to be, like the mayor-elect. She had already won. And that family had shown up in solidarity, but he found that boy and he led that boy to safety, effectively saving himself in the process. A lot of interesting themes and elements going into the finale of this movie and how it ties in to what the future of the Batman franchise is going to be. But let me quickly talk about like the final little bit with this, where you've got Riddler who has lost it all. He's in Arkham Hospital. He's kind of howling like a wounded dog. But then a person next to him starts talking. And he says, riddle me this. And they have a conversation. And we can barely see his face. We can barely see that twisted smile. And we hear the cackling. We hear the laugh. And we know what's coming. We know what's coming for the next movie, or at least what's being hinted at for down the road. And I think given everything that's going on with the post-Batman release, with all the HBO Max shows, I think what we're going to be getting is more Joker sooner rather than later. And let me explain. So what HBO Max is doing is they've got the Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin show, the Gotham PD show, a new show just about the Arkham Hospital or Arkham Asylum show that just got basically announced today. And then there is the fact that the Penguin show is effectively Batman 2. The storyline that Matt Reeves had for the Batman 2 involving the Penguin's rise to power is going to be this show on HBO Max, opening the door for a different villain or villains, more of the Rogues Gallery making an appearance in the aftermath of this tragic event to hit Gotham, where that power vacuum is going to be filled by someone way more dangerous than Carmine Falcone. And that is going to be really fascinating because this movie grounds these heroes in a way that makes them relatable and makes them interesting, and you want to spend more time with them. And that's where I'm at with it, guys. That's where I'm at with it. I love this movie. Before we kind of wrap it up, I do want to point out that the musical score by Michael Giacchino was wonderful. If you haven't heard the whole thing, it's on YouTube. Go check it out. It's a wonderful soundtrack. It fits the tones and the themes and the narratives just right. And it's one that, my God, you should definitely check out. But in the meantime, I do want to hear from you guys. I want to hear your thoughts on this. You guys can find me on Twitter at mjarbo, on Instagram and TikTok under Real Matt Jarbo. YouTube, obviously, youtube.com/Podio Commentary. The podcast is available anywhere you get your podcast. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes or Google Podcasts or Stitcher, thank you. Please leave a review. If you're catching this on YouTube and you've made it all the way through, do me a solid and leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. And if you have another movie you'd like me to break down and talk about, let me know. I'll be back next week with another episode of Podio Commentary. Have yourself a great day, everybody. Thank you again, and peace out.